Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Jordan tonight. Jordan is a listener who reached out to me via email. He's from California. He's had some really interesting things that have happened over the year. So, Jordan, I'm so glad that we are on the phone together tonight and we're able to have this conversation. I'm going to let you go ahead and take it from here, my friend.
Sounds good. Well, first off, Jeremiah, just wanted to say thank you for giving a platform for people to get experiences off their chest, and just discuss these things. But to start off, I'm 37 years old. I have been hunting with my dad since about the age 10 or 11. Kind of always been a little tag along at first. And then I got into it for myself about a decade ago. Had an old boss that actually gave me one of his hand-me-down compound bows, and I just fell in love with that aspect of hunting. Not really so much rifle hunting, but just fell in love with being in the outdoors. I like hiking, hunting, of course, camping, everything that goes along with it, and just getting an appreciation of nature. So basically, my dad and me have been hunting at the same spot for about the last 10 or 11 years in Northern California, and it is about, I want to say, about an hour and a half from South Lake Tahoe, which a lot of people will be familiar with that area. And we always would go up a day or two before opening weekend of archery season, get set up, get camp set up, get the dogs familiar with all the areas, basically just the normal prepping, getting food ready, just ready to go for the opening weekend. So about 5:15 in the morning is kind of when we step out of the trailer that we camp in, and we kind of do our usual just loading our packs up, checking, to make sure we have water. Always got to make sure you have a little toilet paper in your hunting pack just in case. Also, my dad, he was accompanying me on this trip, and as he usually does. And we started loading our gear up, I'd have to say, at 5:15, like I was saying. And then I always have a habit of, once I get all my camo gear on, once I make sure my backpack is stocked up for the day, general, just your supplies, maybe a couple snacks, a couple granola bars, things like that. I ended up strapping on my vinyl harness setup, which I carry a little rangefinder that connects on a retractable cord to that. So at that point, sun is starting to come up. It's got that kind of hazy golden hour, so to speak. Things are starting to come clear. Well, I have a ritual of always checking my binoculars, making sure they're adjusted, making sure I can see things clearly, check my rangefinder, make sure the battery is charged up on that, and I'll generally go through, I'm very routine oriented, so I'll go through sort of a checklist, make sure binoculars set up, rangefinder is good to go, battery wise it's good to go. And the campsite that we stay at, it has lakes, and there's a lower campsite, and then there's a road that cuts in between both lakes, and then there's an upper campsite, which is what we prefer to stay at. But this time, just because it's been getting busier and busier, we were staying at the lower campsite, which, I mean, they're all great views. Weather's beautiful up there. You know, it's gorgeous where we camp at. So in the meantime, I'm talking to my dad. I got my vinyl harness set up on. I'm just checking stuff because we have seen deer actually above the second campsite. Sometimes in the morning moving. For anybody who's not familiar with deer hunting, right when the sun comes up, early morning is usually when they move. Middle of the day, once it gets warmer, they're bedded down in thickets, brush. It's very hard to track them. And at evening, they come out. So I'm doing my normal scanning the hillside above the upper campsite. When I start seeing movement coming out of a thicket of trees headed towards a lake, or the lakes that we stay at. So, you know, I'm kind of chatting it up with my dad. We're kind of joking. I think he's drinking a little bit of coffee, and I'm eating cereal out of a little styrofoam cup or styrofoam bowl. And I start seeing what at first I thought was possibly a bear walking towards the lakes. It continued to travel towards the lakes, but the odd thing is it was clearly walking bipedally upright, and it was also making, I could see it stepping over fallen trees, branches. It just moved very efficiently and was very comfortable walking upright. So it kept heading towards the lakes, and I was looking at it with the naked eye and then switching in between looking back at it with binoculars. I kept watching it heading closer and closer to the lakes, and the sun is still rising. We're kind of getting a late start on the hunt that morning, so, you know, I kind of pushed it out as far as I could, but eventually we had to take off, you know, so I kept watching it as long as we could. It kept heading in the same direction from the mountain kind of hill above the lakes, headed towards the lakes. Well, as the sun's coming up, you know, and we're thinking we got to get in the vehicle, head to the trailhead, and take off from there to go hunting for the AM. The sun keeps coming up, and as it should have been more visible, this upright walking, what we assumed was a bear, maybe a hiker, maybe somebody wearing all black, just disappeared. So it was about I'd say a good 1 to 3 minutes that I was watching it. And I just noticed that it was walking really, really well, and it was also going upright, and it was also going through some really thick brush that was, I'm guessing, 200 to 300 yards away from where we were at the campsite. Whatever it was very big, and it, you know, the weird thing is when you see something like that, your brain goes through a checklist of what it has to be or things that you know that it has to be. So it went from the discussion that we were having was, oh, it's a bear that has an injured front paw that's possibly adapted really well at walking upright, to, no, there must be a guy out here that's really tall, wearing all black, has a black hoodie on, and he's also walking through thick brush, buckbrush, headed to these lakes, which also didn't really make much sense at the time. So as the morning went on, you know, we kind of discussed it a little bit, and at that point, you know, we were just focusing on the hunt that we had in front of us and hoping we get some action. And as time went on that day, nothing weird happened. Rest of the day, you know, business as usual. We went through our hunts, didn't see anything, but we did get one heck of a workout in. So, you know, in the afternoon, I found myself thinking about it again. and, thinking, okay, maybe it was just a hiker. Maybe, we've seen weird things while hunting. People that seemed out of place in that area, or people walking through the middle of thickets of trees that weren't wearing hiking gear, just different things. I had to go through a checklist multiple times thinking what exactly it was that we saw. Well, a few days passes, and generally we stay about 4 to 5 days up there on opening weekend, which is the third weekend of August here in California for archery season. And my curiosity got the better of me. So later on in that same trip, we end up hiking and hunting the hills and mountains directly above the upper campsite. I end up deciding to walk over to that area of thickets and brush where we saw something a few mornings before. And I go up to that area, and I noticed that it is extremely tall. So the brush that I saw from a distance that didn't seem that tall ended up being at least, my guess, 6 to 7 feet at the top. Well, whatever was walking through that area happened to be at least a shoulder and head length above that brush. So, we thought that was really odd. And then, we made jokes that, it had to be a retired NBA basketball player, was wearing all black, happened to have a black hoodie on, and he decided to walk to the lakes from wherever he was camping. Well, after I came to think about it more and more, it just made no sense that somebody would walk through thick brush that contains thorns and stuff going to this lake when there's openings on both sides of it. There's areas that people have walked to those lakes, and it just nothing was adding up really about it. And to add another thing about it, you could clearly see what we saw, lifting its legs, stepping over small brush, branches possibly. It had such a effortless walk down the side of a fairly steep terrain, which also made me think that it wasn't a hiker and definitely was not anybody, human walking down there. So, another weird thing about all this is when it should have been visible, when the sun was coming up right before we took off from camp, it had just completely disappeared, like as if the event had never happened, which was pretty crazy to think about, and to this day still kind of has me stumped. So we've been hunting up until last year was our last year hunting at this area, because my dad ended up moving out of state, and he's living in an area now that has some great hunting. So I'll probably be going over there this archery season. But a few seasons later, I would have to say probably about probably a year or two after the main sighting happened, or my first experience happened, we were tent camping this time instead of staying in a trailer, because we were only going a couple days, and it is pretty difficult to get into the area that we stay at. So we decided, we're going to dry camp. We're going to head up there, and hopefully make something happen in a few days instead of staying 4 or 5 days like we normally do during opening weekend. Well, about on the first night that we were in camp, same campsite that we always go to, or same general area, same 2 lakes that we always hunt at during archery season and opening weekend, we hear something at about 2 or 3 in the morning, and it is very loud to the point that it wakes me and my dad up from our dead sleep. And it sounded as almost like I know this sounds crazy, but it sounded somewhere between a howl of a owl mixed with the bark of a dog, and it was just very, very loud. So, we kind of get up in our tent and we're sitting up and we're listening, and it keeps going on. We're guessing that it had to be maybe 100, 150 yards from like the campsite on the lower lakes that we were staying at and the hill behind it. And, we heard other people getting up, and, there was other campers next to us, and you could tell too, you were seeing flashlights turning on and stuff. So we know other people definitely heard that. And I've been in areas where there's mules and donkeys and near pack stations, and they do make noises that are somewhat terrifying at first when you hear it, or if you're not used to those type of sounds, it can be pretty it's pretty shocking, some of the noises that they can make, in the middle of the night that you'll hear. But where we were staying at, there's no horses up there, no mules, and it did not sound like that. I've been, like I said, around horses, mules, donkeys, and that was definitely not what that was. But it was an extremely loud noise that sounded like a combination of multiple animals. And the funny thing is, it almost sounded like something that would be off of Jurassic Park, which I thought was really odd. And no animal that's up there makes a noise like that. I mean, you have mountain lions, you have bears, of course, deers, and nothing makes that loud of audible noise. And it had a certain pitch and a tune to it that was just odd. It was very odd to hear it.
I have a question.
So,
I have a question real quick. When you heard these noises, were they affecting you in any way? Mentally, physically, did they make you feel off? Anything like that?
The strangest thing is, Jeremiah, when we heard that, it almost had like an effect that made you want to go see what it was, if that makes sense. I know talking about it sounds crazy, but it was really weird. It almost drew you to the sound. And I'm a pretty, I would say, pretty light sleeper, as in the fact that if I hear noises and stuff, I'm always a little bit on edge in the mountains, just being out there and stuff. I always keep an eye to things, and my dad is the exact opposite. He's the guy that you say, hey, what was that? And he's just, I'll go back to sleep. Well, this time it actually woke both of us up. And it probably had been going on for 10 to 15 minutes at least before it woke us up, because I remember hearing it while I was asleep. But it was, it definitely had an effect on us that wasn't necessarily a scary thing, but more so as in it made us really, really intrigued, which I thought was really weird considering the type of noise that it was, that it just wasn't anything I have ever heard, ever being in the mountains. So we continued for like I said, the last 10 to 11 years, we've been hunting that same area. Last year was our last season that we were going to be going up there for opening archery. And so give a little context to this. When you head to the two lakes that we camp at and we hunt out of, about 45 minutes up the road, there's a more commercial lake. I'm not commercial, but it's more of a lake that you get a lot of people from the Bay Area. A lot of city people go to that lake because it has a regular asphalt road to it, and the lakes that we stay at, you have to travel on a dirt road for probably, I can't imagine how many miles, but it's about 30 minutes of just dirt road, and it has switchbacks. It's a little more difficult to access. So we decided to drive to that lake, which has a convenience store there and like a little burger spot. Really good burgers, by the way. But we needed to get some more supplies. I think we were deciding to actually make some hamburgers that day, and possibly, got a couple sodas or maybe a beer or two. And so we're headed back on the road, and this is probably middle of the day. I want to say, anywhere from 11 to 1 o'clock, we're driving back to that lake. And when we get close to the lake, we notice that there's about 50 government plate vehicles, Tahoes, blacked out Tahoes with government plates on them, which struck us as very, very odd in that area, because you're a good, you're at about 7,500 feet, 8,000 feet at that lake, which is a little bit lower than where we stay at. And there was a heavy presence of apparently government employees, which, it's just odd that either there was, somebody very high profile that was in that area, or there was some reason that they were up there. And considering the things that we've seen, heard, it just can't, you start putting everything together, the optics of it were that they were there for some type of reason. And to this day, we don't know what exactly.
It's definitely a very strange coincidence, and it makes you wonder, no doubt, especially that many vehicles,
I know. And the thing is when you get to this lake, there's little areas on both sides of the road where people park at, over time, fishermen, people, that are there for the day, families, they all park on both sides of it. And this wasn't like an incorporated parking lot at the convenience store. It was just on the side of the road, and we noticed so many vehicles on both sides. It was really it makes your head it's a head scratching moment for sure.
I would like to take a few minutes and talk about your first initial sighting, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm. That's no problem.
Yeah. So, which is, just an incredible, like, that being your first interaction, you were looking through your rangefinder, right?
Yeah, rangefinder and binoculars. I'm anybody who knows me knows that I'm very detail oriented, very routine about things. So in the morning, when I'm getting ready and we're getting ready to either take off from camp or drive to some trailheads that we take off from, I always look through my binoculars and my rangefinder. And I go through the binoculars, and the brand that I have, has that normal little turn dial that is kind of at your, center between your eyebrows, is where that is located. So I always tend to just check to make sure that it's focused, and adjust it depending on if I'm wearing my reading glasses or my prescription glasses or not. Then I always try to make sure that that's all dialed in for before we take off, and the same thing with my rangefinder. I just want to make sure that the battery didn't die overnight or something was leaning on one of the buttons, when I put it up in my backpack the night before. It's just always habit. I just always want to make sure that my gear's ready to go when I take off from camp or whenever we do that hunt in the morning.
Oh, absolutely. Which I think is great. Remembering what you saw, I've got a few questions about that. Were you able to see what the gait of the creature was, like how it was moving, how it was stepping?
Yeah, what was really weird about it was that it moves so smoothly going downhill that the only thing that I can compare it to is if you were going down an escalator and you were walking down at the same time that you were going down that escalator.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you notice anything out of the ordinary? So let's pretend we're looking at the legs, right? And you've got my anatomy is not up to par, but the part of the leg that is below the knee, which I believe would be the shin, and that area below or above the ankle. Was there anything out of the ordinary about the movement of the creature in that part of the leg?
No, not that I noticed, but the area that it was traveling through for some portion of the sighting of it did have a lot of thick brush. So for a portion of it, we were just seeing what looked like somebody very tall with a hoodie on, all black, that was head and shoulders going through some buck brush is what we kind of call it, which is not a technical term, but sometimes there's some type of berries. You know, when you get to the high country, they have thorns in them. And so for a portion of it, all I was seeing was just shoulders and head above some very thick brush.
Gotcha.
And then when it finally did go through that area, you know, and you could kind of see stuff, it just had a very unique look to it. I mean, the gait to it, the walk to it it almost lifted each individual foot, like as if you would if you were stepping through mud or you were trying to shake something off your feet as you were taking every step. It seemed like it was lifting its legs, like it was stepping over things that were higher than were on the ground, like as if you were almost doing high knees or exaggerating how you were lifting your feet. Say you were walking over a small branch and you lifted your knees and feet very, very high to go over something small. It looked odd.
Gotcha. When you mentioned that it almost seemed like it was trying to shake mud off its legs, were you able to see the legs at the time when it was making those kind of movements?
Yeah, we could. It was probably only about a quarter of the time that I saw it, I was able to witness that. And it you know, at the distance that we were at, which was, I'm guessing, about 200 to 300 yards, it was kind of hard to make out any discernible features. And the really odd thing is it was so dark that it looked almost like a shadow walking through brush.
Okay, gotcha. So it might be a little tough. Like if I was to ask when it was doing the shaking the mud off of its legs, do you remember if let's say the way it was walking, was it moving its legs just straight forward, or was it doing a weird motion with its legs when it walked, when it was doing the mud shaking?
That's kind of hard to say,
right.
Really, from what I remember. But I guess the closest thing that I could really compare it to is like the movement as if people at the gym, when they go on the stair machine, and you see some people that do exaggerated movements when they lift their legs really high, but it was doing that while traveling downhill, which struck me as really odd.
Okay, wow, that is really interesting. Are you a guy who watches Bigfoot videos and documentaries and stuff?
Yeah, you know, honestly, so this is the backstory behind all this stuff. For years, I mean, my dad, he's a no-nonsense type of guy. He's the one guy when crap hits the fan that you want to have with you. He's been hunting since he was probably early 20s, you know, and this was 4 decades later.
Okay.
3 or 4 decades later. So he, you know, he doesn't, basically, we kind of made jokes about it. And before that point, I had known about Bigfoot, you know, and we changed the channel, and, you know, you'd find, I'm not going to say the exact show, but you find one on, and we would kind of make jokes at it or say, like, you know, or we thought it was something funny, kind of, in a way. We never took it serious. And then after the sighting happened that we had, plus some weird stuff that we added up together, it just changed my outlook, at least on everything, and it got me to researching a lot more into that topic, you know. And it's just something you can't shake. It's once you have an experience like that, there's probably honestly not one day that goes by that I don't think about that in some capacity.
Oh, absolutely. And I asked that because the really detailed questions I was asking right there, I was kind of trying to see. I was just curious what you had noticed, because there's an old documentary called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science from Doug Hychek, and he has a very detailed part about the supposed gait of a Sasquatch. And what you said was very interesting. I don't know if you've never watched that. It would be.
I never have. No.
Okay, so I think you can find it on YouTube, potentially, and I would be very interested if you were to watch that and then contact me back. And there's the especially the part about the gait of the creature, and they try to replicate it. And I'd be interested to see. But moving on, and I also do want to point out that we had talked beforehand that this is your first time actually sharing all these things that have happened without outside the reach of people that are extremely close to you. So this is your first time sharing that. But so looking through your optics, how much of the details of the face and the body were you able to see?
You know, to start off, because the sun was just starting to come up and everything kind of had that orange hue to it, so to speak. It was really hard to get discernible features, and the odd thing was, you could tell that it was. My first thought was it was something covered in fur or hair. That's why I first went to it. Had to be a bear, you know, and it was a bear that knew how to walk really well on two legs, its hind legs, but it was just so dark that you couldn't make out exactly what it was. And like I said, you just go through the, you know, gambit of it's got to be this. No, it has to be that. It has to be this. And Bigfoot was honestly probably one of the last things on that list that was a possibility, you know, what we saw.
So it sounds like we're not seeing fine details like facial features, fine details like that, hair color. Although you did mention, you know, black.
Yeah, right? It was jet. It was like pretty much a jet black from where we were standing, and even, you know, the odd thing is even looking at it with binoculars. I mean, the lighting wasn't the best, of course, but looking at it with binoculars, it was so dark in the shoulder and neck and face region that it was almost impossible to make out any exact details, which I thought was really odd.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. So definitely not seeing anything about the eyes.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Not that I don't remember any of that.
Did you see? Let's say, did you notice like the shape of the head at all?
Yeah, it was very rounded. That's why I first. I mean, it seemed very large. It didn't definitely. It almost seemed as if a person had a very almost like a cloak or something you see in Star Wars or that type of loose garment over the head. So it was it was pretty big, a lot more big than what I would think a human's head would look like from that distance. That's for sure.
So when you say kind of like a cloak, are you kind of saying like maybe there was like a cone shape to the head or I don't know.
It actually looked round to me, okay. But it's just from where the shoulders went to the head. It didn't go like a human would, where, you know, you have your clavicle and then it goes into your neck. It looked like it was just rounded out from, like, basically essentially something touched almost from the shoulder to the top part of the head. Okay. So not really like much of a neck then. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That was the first thing I thought.
Were you able to tell if you were maybe looking at a male creature or a female creature in any way?
No, I could not. From where I there was no discernible, you know, anything visible of that nature.
Gotcha. And so you were getting really a side view of the creature as it walked across, or?
It was kind of, so at first it started making, it was traveling from like left to right, and then at one point it turned almost like dead on to us for a little bit of it.
Gotcha. When it did that turn, and I apologize, I'm going to be asking questions, and, you know, if it's dark, that's no problem, but the point where it turned and moved towards you, at that point, were there any things you noticed that you hadn't noticed when it was just walking from left to right?
No, there was nothing as in like certain features that I noticed. It just had such a weird movement. It was very like stiff. It almost moved in a robotic manner, if that makes sense.
Interesting. It's such a weird it's such a weird variation, you know. So you're on the one hand, the creature is moving very smoothly, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
But then on the other hand, it has kind of a robotic movement to it. You said, right?
Yep. And I've seen that before with certain athletes and stuff they can move so well and their movements are so precise that it almost looks robotic.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. Remembering what you had looked at, did it give you more the sense like maybe you were looking at a creature that was in some way related to a human or to an ape or something that just didn't really fit in either of those boxes?
For me, it looked like a human.
Okay.
It resembled more human, but then on the other hand, it also seemed as if, like when you see animals, I'm not sure if you're familiar with animals and their movements and stuff, and so the whole thing it was like somebody going to that lake, like as if we see deer or bears do it. They go to water sources, and they usually do it first thing in the morning. That's when a lot of animals are moving, and that's basically what it was, and that's what I thought at first. Just like if we were looking through our binoculars, and I was to see a doe or a buck, going to get water.
Wow. What other sounds were you hearing at that time?
So during the initial sighting, it was just the normal, sounds. I think there was some birds chirping, just different stuff in camp. Okay. Nobody was really up at that point. Where we camp at, there's, you got your normal hikers, some families, but that year, from what I remember, there wasn't a whole lot of hunters. So at that time in the morning, I want to say also in the campsite that we were at, I don't recall anybody else being up at all in that area.
At any point, were you able to see the full length of the arms?
Yes, I was. In between So when it was traveling, through the thickets, and then at some point that brush got a little shorter, is my speculation or what I saw, you could see arm movement, and they were kind of swinging back and forth.
Interesting. How long were these arms hanging down, would you say?
I would say, oh man, I'm going to have to go back into my memory bank really good on this part.
Okay.
And I would have to say it was probably comparable to a human as far as they didn't look abnormally long. But they also were kind of, hinged at what would be the elbow area.
Interesting. So definitely not like you would say, not past the knees, not down, not down there. No. Okay. But you're also, I'm going to estimate, well, let's say you said the brush was 6 to 7 feet tall, and you said you could see the shoulders and the head. So how tall would you estimate what you were looking at probably was?
I would have to say that it was definitely, it was at the shortest, it was 7 foot, but I'm guessing between the 7 to 8 foot range.
Yeah, gotcha. Were you able to see anything about the hands at all?
No, I mean, not really, other than just seeing dark.
Right.
What I'm assuming were the hands area, going back and forth, like during the walking movement. I'm sorry.
At any time, did you start having I'm going to try to think of how I'm going to say this. When you're watching the creature, was there any time a difference in how your body was reacting, your mental state, your how you felt internally?
No, not really that I noticed, and I think now that I have seen this, it kind of I realize that when you see something that doesn't make any sense, that the human tries to rationalize what they saw. So it was just I was coming up with so many different excuses at the time of what it had to be, and
Mm-hmm.
oh, even though none of it added up, it was like, oh no, there's no way that it could be something upright, dark, covered in fur, walking towards this lake where you have campers at the lower spot, and above both lakes there's a campsite above there, and it was probably only 200 yards from the right of the upper campsite.
Gotcha.
It just seemed weird that, I mean, it was close enough to the campsites, but not. It was close enough to where if it was a person, they would have walked in the openings to get to the lake. They wouldn't have gone through dense brush,
Right.
thickets to go to the lake. It made no sense as to why. Because I've walked by that brush before, and it's so thick in there, and also there's thorns. Just nobody that has any clue about being in the mountains and walking through that terrain would go straight through the center of it.
That makes sense. There's no logical reason for a human to be over there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
gotcha.
Because if it wanted to go to the lake for whatever reason, it would go in the openings, and there's areas where there's knee-high grass, and then there's areas where there's shorter grass. It would have taken an easier route, basically, to get to the lake.
After you had this experience, did this affect your time back at home in any way?
No, not so much, but I get teased from time to time because I'm so into the subject now, and it sent me on a deep dive where, I mean, I have a stack right now under my TV of probably 30 books. My podcast. I have a job where I'm driving site to site to do building inspections. So in between, I'm constantly just watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts related to the subject.
And that happened after this encounter that you got really
Yeah.
super deep into it. Why
Yeah.
what is the main reason you think that you got really into it after that?
My guess is I just wanted to find answers, really.
Right.
When you see something that once you narrow down all the possibilities of what it wasn't, and you start to think of what it could have been, it now, like, I want answers, basically about that. I feel lucky on one hand that I got to witness it, and but then again, it's also changed my view of pretty much everything. It wasn't a huge paradigm shift at the beginning. It wasn't something that was like, oh, everything's completely different. But the more that I narrowed it down, and the more that I went through my checklist and and analyzed it, then it did start to change everything. Like, it's definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different things.
Sure.
Or not just ignoring, and writing stuff off now, whether anybody says, they go into the top of the Dogman, any of the cryptids. Now, before I would have been like, haha, that's funny. But now I'm just like, if these people are seeing something and they, what it is, I don't know, but there is people that are seeing things, and I take it a heck of a lot more serious now. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's like once you have
Yeah.
an encounter like this, it's like all bets are off, I think, for everything else. I do want to ask a question I asked before, maybe a little bit more direct.
Mm-hmm.
After you had this encounter, at any time did you have, were your dreams affected? Did you start to hear any strange voices or anything like that?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Believe it or not, I mean, it didn't. The thing is, the way I look at it is where we go hunting at and where I've been hiking at, you know, and been in the outdoors, there's plenty of things that can harm you that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that aspect, I wasn't like terrified to go back in the woods, or it never made me, you know, it made me more vigilant. That's for sure. And I always was kind of, when we were hunting, you know, I'd take a couple seconds to look off, you know, on the hill next to me with my binoculars or scanning stuff, and always keeping an eye on me. But, you know, from what I learned, it's, you should always be vigilant in the mountains. You know, even, you know, we see people that go out there in areas where we've seen bear before and seen lots of signs of bear. And you know, I don't think they're vigilant enough, really, to be honest. And we see single, you know, people going in there and they're hiking way back just by themselves. And to me, that's kind of reckless.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You mentioned that you had gone back to the actual brushy area afterwards. When you were over there, did you see any evidence of like footprints or, you know, like a massive creature going through? Nothing like that? Okay.
I did not. I basically went to the edge of where that brush was, and I wanted to see how tall that was, you know, so it could give me a better idea to the height of it. And once I realized that it was a lot taller than I thought, it kind of changed. It kind of gave me some answers that I needed, basically.
Makes sense.
You know, and I'm sorry to piggyback on that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, part of the profession that I'm in, I'm constantly measuring stuff with tape measures and, you know, checking diameters of things and stuff, you know, and I thought, you know, maybe I could guess from the distance that I was how tall that was. But then when I actually got right next to it, I kind of, my mind was somewhat blown at how tall that brush actually was.
Absolutely. Just to double check, during that encounter where you had the visual on it, was there any evidence that you had captured from that time?
No, I did not. I do have, you know, when we go hunting, a lot of the times I'll carry my cell phone on me, but where we're at, we have no service for, I mean, we have to drive down the mountain a good hour and a half to even get service.
Sure.
So I carry it. I usually just leave it in the trailer, or I'll put it in my backpack, but I just mainly use that to check trail cameras if we had any set up, or, you know, if I do harvest an animal, I definitely, you know, want to take pictures of that, you know, or have my dad snap a photo of me next to it. But believe it or not, that was the last thing that went through my mind.
When you were looking through your optics at this, if you were in a situation where you could have taken a shot, is it a thing where you would have, or that's not an option at all based on what you saw?
No, that wasn't an option at all. You know, being you know, being around hunting, growing up around hunting, now being immersed in it myself, you don't take a shot at something you're not 100% sure of what it is. And we were there hunting deer, and that was definitely not a deer, so that wasn't even a thought that had gone through my head at all.
It makes sense. It sounds like you started doing a lot of research. Since you know where that exact area is, did you look to see if there'd been any other sightings or encounters in that same area?
I did not, but, you know, I was told by my dad, and this is a secondhand story, and he just had told it to me probably about 5 years ago. But there was another gentleman that comes from the same city where I live in, and he used to hunt with my dad and a group of the other guys. That's how my dad got started, was some older hunters had taken him up to that area, showed him kind of the ropes of all the areas and where deers are usually at. And he was up on the side of this mountain, and same thing, you know, we try to go in and get there as close to daylight as possible. and try to get in our spot where we want to be as close to daylight, before anything moves. And he had said that he saw something run across the side of this hill, which was really steep because I've been on that hill a bunch of times myself, and said that it was absolutely flying on the side of this hill and moving at a speed that it was just not humanly capable. And in that area, there's a lot of volcanic rock and there's a lot of shale, and he said that it was just moving through there like it was nothing, like it was on flat ground, essentially.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely adds another side to it for sure. So before we had taken a small detour back to talk about your initial sighting, we were talking about the tent camping, and we talked about that for a little bit. Are there any other interesting things that you've noticed over the years as well besides that?
Yeah. So we also hunted another area that's a little closer to the city that I live in. So for context, the area where my first sighting occurred at is about 3.5 hours away from the city that I live in. But we also go to this other area that's on the backside. Well, essentially, we come in from the backside of the ski resort, and we drop down on top of the ridge. And if you look far down below, about 1,000 yards, you can see the lodge, parking lot, all that area. But if you stay on that ridge line, you have a bunch of slopes going down underneath you that all converge down at the base of the ski resort. And we always stay on that ridge line, and there's a couple game trails that are about 40 to 50 yards below the top of that ridge that we see deers, first thing in the morning, right before dark as well. They'll be cutting across there. So me and my dad were posted up there in the afternoon. Usually we take off from camp at about, depending on how the weather is that season, if it's abnormally warm, we'll wait a little bit later to take off from camp to go up the trail, and go on the backside of the ski resort and drop down on it. And we were just sitting on one of the runs. So imagine the top of the run, where the ski lift lets you out at, and you strap your gear in. Sometimes there's a little bench right there, or different trail markers up at that area. Well, we're looking down the run, and we've seen deer crossing about halfway down this area, this specific ski run that we look at, and we started hearing, crashing of something that sounded like it. And we made a joke even at first, is there a dinosaur going through this thicket? So between ski runs, you have the opening clearings, and generally you have tree areas, where people will do tree riding or they haven't carved it out down the center yet. And we just noticed there was just a lot of crashing, and there was trees in that area that were probably 30 feet tall that were actually swaying back and forth. Which, bears go through areas, and they scratch against trees, or, they push against stuff. But whatever this was that was in the trees between the runs sounded absolutely massive.
That must have been the weirdest thing ever, to be honest. To see a 30-foot tree just start swaying and the crashing going on. I don't know if it's
I know, and the problem is being a hunter and stuff. I'm not sure if you've been around hunters, much or around that culture, but you always want to think that you're the top dog, in the mountains. You want to think you're, the alpha that's out there, but
right.
And so it's kind of, you kind of try not to be like, oh man, I'm spooked, or showing too much fear, but that was definitely weird. I was just hoping that whatever was inside that area did not pop out or come towards us, because whatever it was sounded absolutely massive.
That's wild.
Yeah. A funny side note, Jeremiah. So I know you're familiar with the Missing 411 series.
Yep, absolutely.
The David Pilates, all that. He had a part that had the Sierra sounds in it on, I'm not sure which volume it is. Well, come to find out, two of the guys that recorded the Sierra sounds lived in the same city that I did in California.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly
and this
who
is the
you're
even
talking about.
crazier part about it, is one of the guys, which he hasn't gone on, to Ron Moore. I don't know if I was supposed to say that. He, has gone on different shows. One of the guys has gone on different shows and been on documentaries. Well, another one of the hunters that was with him ended up being my parents bought the land from him that they built their house on.
Really?
Yeah, and the weirdest thing is I've seen him around. I mean, I still see him to this day, driving around with his wife, and they never broadcasted it, or anything. We had no clue, and we're watching this documentary, and we're like, wait, we know these two guys right here, and one of them, his house, I can literally almost see from my parents' house. Well, the back of his property, at least I could see.
So you're definitely not talking about Ron Moorhead, and that's public knowledge. Like Ron Moore, everyone knows about Ron Moorhead, but you're talking about another hunter.
Yeah, and my dad actually did know Ron too, but one of the other hunters that was with him, and there's pictures of him on that documentary, and they don't name him specifically, but I mean, we definitely know who he is. Obviously, he's been around our city forever, but
that's wild.
To this day, I ride bikes and stuff, and I see him out mowing his yard and stuff, and I really want to go up to him and talk to him, but he's an old school cowboy type of guy, and I just don't know how he's going to respond to it, really.
So I'll say this. If you ever feel so inclined and you do see him, and you want to go on a quest for this podcast, if you feel so inclined, you could, if you do strike up a conversation with him and let him know, hey, if he ever does want to talk about what happened during that time on a podcast, I would love to interview this gentleman. I don't think he's ever been interviewed. I can't even think of what the guy's name is, but
he has not that I know, and I've done a lot of research.
Okay.
And it's just so wild to me that one of the guys that was involved with, probably the, premier recording never went on the record really or anything.
That's wild. That's a huge synchronicity that you actually know who the dude is, and there's that connection with the purchasing of property. And man, I know if it could happen, that would be wild if he would ever go on record and chat about it.
Yeah, I know. I definitely, because I ride bikes with one of my friends around here a lot on the weekends, and he's always out every Saturday mowing his yard, and I always want to stop, but usually we're in the middle of a bike ride, and it's like, you just don't know how to approach these type of things. This isn't like a conversation where I can just start out with that, kind of got to create a little bit of rapport. Generally, I've noticed.
It is kind of that's an interesting conversation to just really launch into.
Yeah, and he's closer with my dad, as in like they've known each other for years. But how I've been so interested in the topic, I've always been like, man, if I could just talk to him, and just hear his firsthand experience of that, it would be absolutely amazing.
Jordan, this is what you got to do. You got to get your dad involved. Your dad is the key to this, because it sounds like they've been buddy for years. And your dad's into Bigfoot too, right? Like, or he's been involved with it. So,
and that's the funny thing is when all this had gone down, years ago, and we kind of kept it hush hush, or every so often we'd talk about it, and I noticed little by little he started getting a lot more involved in the last couple of years. I mean, as far as I catch it, he would be watching stuff on YouTube before he moved, and they moved out of state, he would be watching stuff on YouTube. I'd go over their house and he was watching a documentary or Missing 411 and stuff. And I noticed it definitely, he's definitely got a lot more open-minded, than I thought he would ever be about the topic.
Absolutely. I mean, wow, that was quite the rabbit trail we just went on, but I'm glad we went on
I know.
it. That's pretty cool.
I know. I know. I was just I wrote a little note about that, and it's just a weird little tidbit because and a lot of the older hunters around this area that I've come in contact with my dad and stuff, they would always tell it like almost like an urban legend. Like, there's some guys from this area that have gone hunting up by, and they had a bunch of mysterious things happen to them, and they they never said anything about recording audio, which was really weird too, and it was almost like like an urban legend. You tell everybody like, oh, and I never knew who the guys were until I saw that documentary, and neither did my dad.
Holy mackerel.
Which is really odd.
So you're saying like the recording of the Sierra sounds were some like local legend you would hear, and then you realized it's a huge part of Bigfoot history. Holy mackerel.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Oh, wow.
And we would say, my dad would tell me, there's some guys that, had gone up to the high country, and they had this secret little, honey hole that they've always been hunting out of on horseback. And I assumed that it was an actual cabin, not like a lean-to, or structure that was just built out there. I thought it was a cabin, and we had heard stuff that something was pounding on the side of their cabin, and something spooked their horses, and all these different things. And then come to find it and find out the real story. It was just, it was amazing, honestly. I couldn't believe that. Like I said, I almost want to get an autograph from this guy, and have it somewhere in my house.
Oh, I mean, that'd be so cool. Do I need to cut out this part?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
I don't think, I don't know if they really like said that much. I mean, I don't know if that was actually, I remember watching the Missing 411, but I don't know if they actually, me personally, I have no clue where it is, but I do know kind of the area that it's in.
I think it's a Missing 411 the hunted, and I think they leave it vague.
Yeah, that's
like
exactly
they say it's somewhere in the Sierras. I believe it's how they put it, but I think it's not many people know the exact location of where it actually happened.
And I think only those gentlemen do, and I think one of them, Ron, took his wife there. But other than that, that's pretty much at the time when they were allowing them to be up there, was an area only a couple of those guys knew.
It's wild to think that like the guys from that generation that would have been like the guys like Ron that went out during that time in the 70s, like, I mean, those guys are almost gone. Like, that's why I take this interviewing people extremely serious, especially when it's the older generation where they start talking about how they were going out in the late 70s. I mean, those guys, it's almost, I mean, even the guys in the 90s, they're getting old too, man, that were researching. So
I know, and it's just those guys, I didn't realize that they literally paved the way for a lot of the stuff nowadays. Absolutely. And of course the average person that isn't into the topic isn't really going to know this, but those guys are essentially, to me, some of the founding fathers of a lot of this research.
I would agree. If you had the chance to see what you saw that one day again, would you want to see that again?
And partially, part of me wants to, but the other part of me knows exactly, what I saw that day. So it's not like I need confirmation of any sorts. It would be nice, but then again, after learning about different sightings and encounters, I don't necessarily want to be close to something like that. Or, I don't want to have some of these encounters where things are getting thrown at me, or, I hear something going around our trailer at night, or, around our tent at night. I don't want anything like that. Now, from a hill with maybe a spotting scope or my binoculars, a good 400 or 500 yards away at least, would be ideal, but that's about as close as I really want to get to anything like this.
It's extremely interesting.
And then something that this whole event kind of didn't plague me for years, but it always has been in my mind. And, I needed to get some type of clarity, and I went to, I go to church and I'm a believer, and I went to a pastor that I'm very comfortable sharing stuff with, and I trust his guidance. And he had kind of an interesting take on it that did kind of open my eyes to stuff, or it definitely sparked a different way of thinking about the whole event. And he essentially, said that there's a spiritual realm that's around us, and every so often that veil is thin enough to where people see stuff, that these are occurrences that happen all the time, but for whatever reason, certain people are able to view these things happening. And the reason that kind of resonated with me was because as the sun continued to rise that morning, it should have been more visible, and instead it did the exact opposite, or it just vanished as if it was almost supernatural in a sense.
So does that mean then that as the sun rose, you actually saw the creature start to disappear in front of your eyes?
No, not in that aspect. It was just every so often, I kept, I like went and grabbed my bow real quick and was loading up the vehicle. But in the meantime, loading up the back of my dad's Jeep. But in the meantime, I was keeping an eye on that same area, and I kind of stepped away for a second to get my bow set up and, make sure my arrows were all secured in the quiver, and then put it on my backpack and set it in the back of the Jeep, because we were actually going to the hunt off this trailhead that's about a quarter of a mile away from camp. And when I turned back around, it was just completely gone, as if nothing was there at all. And nothing, it was the oddest thing.
That is very odd.
Yeah, it's just, but that's happened before with, you see like a really big buck, or, sometimes you see wildlife and it's just in and out quick, it's almost like if you saw a ghost, but except this thing was tall walking towards a lake.
So personally, yourself, have you decided what you feel a Bigfoot is yourself then?
That's a pretty tough question. For me, all its movements and what it was doing 100% reminded me of, an animal going to a lake to get water, first thing in the morning. But then the part that has me stumped is the part of how it just seemed to just vanish into thin air at the end of it all. So, I know there's two different camps, so to speak, and one is that it's a physical creature, and then the other one is the whole woo and supernatural aspect, but it kind of had aspects of both for me in my encounter.
And you know what? How I'm starting to feel personally, the more I get into this, is that I don't think it's out of the question to have a physical creature that maybe can do weird stuff that we just don't understand in science yet. That could be considered paranormal, like I don't think that's weird.
And the more that I research, I'm kind of along the same camp. There's just things we don't understand, and I'm okay with that, and maybe as time goes on, people will, there will be more science, or, it'll be accepted that animals can do this or that.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that some animals can influence their prey using infrasound, to make them scared or not be able to run. And Honestly, I think that this creature can also do that. And it's one of the scariest things to think that a creature that large can do that. But we're learning more about it, and it feels like, every answer we get, there's two more questions, but that's part of the research of it. So
yeah, I definitely agree on that.
But Jordan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you tonight, and I'm so glad you're able to share your account with a listener base and be able to feel comfortable enough to be able to do that. Did you have any more closing thoughts before we wrapped up our time here tonight?
Yeah, I guess, some things is it's great that guys like you, and a couple other guys that I follow and listen to podcasts have a platform like this where you're able to discuss things and not feel like you're being judged about them is definitely something that I appreciate, and in a lot of the fields, and the field actually that I currently work with, I've tried to have discussions with certain people, and a lot of times it's just brushed off or people make a smart comment regarding it, and you can tell that they don't really think it's serious or there's just, to them, there's no way that any of this could be real, but it's just really important to have a place to actually discuss stuff like this, and it definitely helps when you have a good support group around you, as in, like, my girlfriend is very encouraging about it all, and she doesn't write it off as just being some tall tale or whopper story, and same thing with my parents. And, my dad has also been very open-minded, and he actually helped me recall or mention some different things, that happened along the years, or a couple of the different things that happened, and that was just huge.
It's extremely important to have a support base like that. So I'm so happy to hear that you actually do have that. Not everyone is lucky enough to have that support base, especially from people, that they're related to and that love them as well. But
yeah, and I still don't. I still, keep it pretty close to the chest, and this isn't something that, I just will discuss with anybody. And so, but at the same time, it is good to have a close, your closest people in your life that are at least willing to hear it, and not just write you off, as being crazy or not knowing what you saw right out the gate.
Absolutely. Well, again, Jordan, thank you for coming on the show. If you happen to have anything else interesting happen in future years, feel free to reach back out to me. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely will.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. All right, I'm going to use this space this week to announce that I'll be at the Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, Oregon as an attender. I won't be presenting or anything, but I'll be hanging out trying to interview people that have had Bigfoot encounters. If you're from the Oak Ridge, Oregon area or surrounding and you've had a Bigfoot experience, please contact me directly, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, Priscilla was nice enough that if you get your tickets through SasquatchSummerfest.com and use code Bigfoot Society, you can get 50% off the cost of your tickets, which is a big amount. So code Bigfoot Society to get 50% off your tickets, SasquatchSummerfest.com, and helps out the podcast as well. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. Here at Bigfoot Society, we're headed to the moon, and here's a current update about going full-time. So here we go. As of 5/22, you're now at 202 patrons out of 824 needed. That's 24.51%, almost a quarter of the way there, guys. Brings us down to 622 left to join the Patreon. So a huge thank you to Barbara, Gregory, Dana, Craig, Jeff, Steve, Ricky D, Norm, Megan, Dan, Daddy Chatty, Joe, Eber, Ike, Jules, Josh, Ryan, Todd, Nathan, Gabe, Bill, Lucky, Megan, William, Bobby Joe, and Inger for joining recently. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.
Wait, there's more. Monsterfest 2 is coming up soon in beautiful Canton, Ohio, and I will be there doing a live podcast. If you've ever wanted to meet Bigfoot Society in person, this is the year to do it. My special guest in the live podcast episode will be Justin from Cryptids of the Corn. You will not want to miss this live episode. And then you can hang out with me at Monsterfest. You can go to smalltownmonsters.com to get your tickets. Pre-sale tickets are $20.50, and tickets at the door will be $25. But kids 12 and under are free. How many places can you go to where kids 12 and under are free? Not many. New this year are the live workshops. I'm excited about this. Extremely excited. How to cast a footprint. How to collect DNA in the woods. Ghost hunting tools 101. How to do research. Also, there's going to be food trucks outside this year, and new guests, new speakers, people you won't. I mean, the coolest thing about last year is that I got to meet people I was not expecting to be there. People like Les Odell, John Hickenbottom, really cool Bigfoot people that I never would have thought that I would have met before, and Seth Breedlove made it happen by making this incredible place for the community to get together. Monsterfest in Canton, Ohio, June 28th through 29th. Guys, do not miss this year. If you missed last year, don't miss this year. Head on over right now to smalltownmonsters.com. I hope to see you there.